When nations stumble into crisis, when their backs press hard against the wall, they don't reach for wisdom, discipline, or restraint. They reach for a lever so dangerous, so tempting, so historically fatal that every empire before them has been destroyed by it. They print money. And what makes this so chilling is that every government believes, every time, that their situation is different, that they're smarter, that they can bend the laws of economics to their will, that they can escape the fate of the nations that came before them. But history has no mercy for those who ignore it. Tonight, we're diving into a pattern that has repeated for thousands of years. A pattern that shattered mighty empires, toppled governments, sparked revolutions, and left ordinary people ruined while their leaders insisted everything was under control. 3 civilizations. 3 different eras. 3 different continents. 1 identical mistake. Ancient Rome, where emperors diluted silver coins to stretch a dying treasury. Weimar Germany, where printing presses roared day and night to pay impossible war debts. And modern Zimbabwe, where a thriving nation collapsed into hyperinflation so absurd that trillion-dollar bills became children's toys. Different cultures, different languages, different rulers. Yet they all walk the same path. A path that begins with crisis, accelerates through denial, and ends in financial oblivion. Here's how the cycle always starts. A government faces a storm, war, recession, political chaos, collapsing revenues. The treasury runs dry. Raising taxes risks rebellion. Borrowing is limited. Spending cuts are politically impossible. And then someone proposes the temporary solution. The painless fix. The magic trick. Just create more money. No need to anger the public. No need to make sacrifices. No need to confront the real problems. Just print. At first, it feels like a miracle. Bills get paid. Soldiers receive wages. Projects continue. The crisis seems to fade. But beneath the surface, the fuse has already been lit. Because when a government prints money faster than the real economy grows, the value of every existing unit shrinks. Savings evaporate. Prices rise. Confidence cracks. And once people begin to doubt their currency, there is no force on earth that can restore it easily. That's when the second phase begins. The accelerating panic. More money is needed to buy the same goods. More money is printed. The currency weakens further. The government prints even more. A self-feeding spiral that every empire believes it can control. Until the moment it can't. Families watch their life savings dissolve. Businesses collapse under chaos. Society fractures. And the government that promised rescue becomes the very engine of destruction. This is the story of Rome. This is the story of Germany. This is the story of Zimbabwe. And unless the world learns from them, it may become our story as well. Because today, every major economy runs on paper money backed not by silver or gold, but by trust. And that trust is thinning. Debt is exploding. Currency creation has become routine. And global systems are more interconnected than ever before. When the next collapse comes, it won't hit one empire. It will hit all of them. To understand what may be ahead, we must journey back to where this cycle first carved its signature into history. Let's begin with Rome. The ancient superpower that believed it could outsmart economic reality, and paid the ultimate price. Rome didn't crumble in a single night. It didn't collapse because of one bad emperor, one barbarian invasion, or one civil war. Those were symptoms, echoes, of a deeper sickness spreading silently through the empire. Money. Or rather, the slow destruction of it. For centuries, Rome's greatness rested on a coin called the denarius, a small piece of silver that carried the weight of an empire. Merchants trusted it from the deserts of Syria to the shores of Britannia. Soldiers accepted it as payment for risking their lives. Citizens saved it for the future, confident that silver would always hold value. Under Augustus, the first emperor, the denarius was 95% pure silver. It was wealth you could feel. You could bite it. You could weigh it in your hand. But running an empire was expensive. And Rome was always at war. One year it was Germania. Then Parthia. Then rebellions in Gaul. Legions needed salaries. Frontier walls needed maintenance. Aqueducts, roads, forums, all demanded constant funding. By the 2nd century the math stopped adding up. Taxes couldn't keep up with military spending. Raising them further risked revolt. Borrowing was limited. The treasury was running dry. And so, like so many governments after them, Rome looked for a shortcut. Instead of admitting they were out of money, emperors began reducing the silver content of the denarius. Not dramatically, not at first. Just enough to mint more coins from the same amount of metal. Felt like the perfect trick. More coins meant more money. More money meant more soldiers, more supplies, more empire. Crisis solved. But it wasn't solved. It was multiplied. Because every time Rome shaved a little silver from its coins, every time it stretched its reserves, every time it pretended it could get something for nothing, it was quietly hollowing out the foundation of its own economy. Under Caracalla in the early 3rd century, the denarius had fallen to about 50% silver. Still shiny. Still stamped with imperial authority. But half of its value had already evaporated. Then came Gallienus. By his reign, the once solid denarius contained less than 5% silver. It was basically bronze with a thin silver wash, so thin that citizens could scratch the surface and watch the illusion flake away. And the people did notice. Because people always notice. Coins felt lighter. Looked different. Sounded hollow. Merchants began testing them. Rejecting them. Demanding more coins for the same goods. Inflation wasn't a theory. It was a farmer discovering that last season's savings now bought half a sack of grain instead of 2. It was a soldier realizing his pay could no longer feed his family. It was an entire empire waking up to the reality that their money was dying in their hands. The government responded the only way governments ever do. By debasing the currency even more. If each coin was worth less, they'd mint more coins. If people doubted the silver, they'd flood the markets with coins anyway, hoping more volume would make up for less value. It never does. Local economies collapsed into barter. Wheat for tools. Pottery for clothing. Gold and foreign coins replaced Rome's once trusted currency. And with the money broken, everything else started breaking too. Soldiers mutinied. Tax collectors couldn't deliver revenue that lost value before reaching Rome. Governors ruled over provinces that contributed nothing but chaos. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome entered its dark era, the crisis of the 3rd century. 50 years. Dozens of emperors, most murdered. Civil wars. Plagues. Invasions. But at its core was one truth. The empire that conquered the world had destroyed its own currency, one coin at a time. Diocletian tried to stop the hemorrhaging with price controls, threatening death for violations. But you can't force people to trust money that no longer has value. Trust, once broken, doesn't return on command. By the time Constantine introduced the gold solidus, the damage was irreversible. The Western Empire was living on borrowed time. Rome believed it could cheat reality. Rome believed debasing money was harmless. Rome believed it was different. It wasn't. And centuries later, another nation would make the same mistake, but faster, louder, and on a scale the world had never seen before. Next stop, Weimar Germany. If Rome's collapse was slow, like a candle burning down over centuries, Weimar Germany was the same disaster compressed into a single, explosive decade. A nation defeated. A government humiliated. And a financial burden so enormous, so crushing, that it pushed Germany into the most infamous hyperinflation the modern world had ever seen. When World War I ended, the Treaty of Versailles didn't simply demand peace. It demanded payment, an economic sentence. 132 billion gold marks. To understand how absurd that number was, Germany didn't have that much gold. It didn't have that much wealth. It didn't have that much anything. The Allies were telling a ruined nation to pay more than its entire economy was worth. Germany faced 4 options. Raise taxes to unbearable levels. Borrow money it couldn't repay. Refuse and face occupation by France and Britain. Print the money. And just like Rome, Germany convinced itself that this time the shortcut would work. At first, the printing presses moved slowly. Just enough to cover reparations. Just enough to calm the public. Just enough to pretend the impossible payments could somehow be met. But debt has a gravitational pull. Once you start printing money to cover obligations, you can never stop. Each batch of new marks made the mark weaker. Each weaker mark meant you needed more marks to buy gold for reparations. And so the presses accelerated. By 1922, the printers were running day and night. Entire factories were repurposed just to produce banknotes. Machines overheated. Ink ran short. Workers operated in shifts, feeding blank paper through steel rollers that never stopped. The numbers became surreal. In early 1922, $1 bought 300 marks. By midsummer it bought 800. By December it bought 7,000. But this was only the beginning. In 1923, inflation broke free of gravity. It wasn't rising, it was exploding. A loaf of bread that once cost a single mark shot to 12 marks. Then 1,000. Then 100,000. Then millions. Until by November 1923 it cost over 200 billion marks. People carried money in baskets, suitcases, wheelbarrows. If you left your wheelbarrow unattended, Thieves might dump out the cash and steal the wheelbarrow, it was worth more than the money inside. Children built toys out of stacks of useless bills. Women burned banknotes to heat water. It was cheaper than firewood. Life savings vanished overnight. Pensions became worthless. Insurance policies, government bonds, bank deposits, all collapsed into dust. The middle class, the social backbone of Germany, simply ceased to exist. And yet, while millions starved or lost everything, a few prospered. Those who understood what was coming traded marks for gold, land, foreign currencies. Factory owners paid off staggering debts with worthless paper and emerged wealthier than before. Foreign investors bought entire companies for the price of a meal. Hyperinflation always transfers wealth. From savers to borrowers. From the cautious to the reckless. From the many to the few. And the anger this created was volcanic. People who lose everything don't stay calm. They don't stay moderate. They don't believe in the system anymore. In the vacuum left by economic collapse, extremism thrives. Political chaos exploded. Radicals gained followers. A failed artist named Adolf Hitler led a coup attempt, the Beer Hall Putsch, right at the peak of the monetary crisis in November 1923. It failed, but the spark had been lit. When a nation's money becomes worthless, truth becomes worthless too. Trust disappears. Hope collapses. People look for someone, anyone, who promises order. Germany finally stabilized its economy by introducing a new currency backed by land and gold. Hyperinflation stopped as abruptly as it had begun. But the scars never healed. A generation had learned the hard way that governments lie about money, that savings can be destroyed overnight, and that democracy offers no protection from economic catastrophe. And while Germany tried to rebuild, the lesson went largely ignored by the rest of the world. Because the cycle was not over. Far from it. Decades later, on a different continent, in a supposedly modern economy, history would repeat itself once again. With terrifying precision. Next, Zimbabwe. If Rome was ancient history and Weimar Germany was the tragedy of a broken post-war nation, then Zimbabwe exposes the most terrifying truth of all. You don't need 1,000 years of decline. You don't need a world war. You don't need total devastation. A country can destroy its currency in less than a decade. Even in the age of global finance, modern economics, and instant information. At the start of the 2000s, Zimbabwe was not a failed state. It was one of Africa's most productive economies. Rich farmland, strong exports, a stable currency, a growing middle class. But political decisions can break even the strongest foundations. It began with land seizures, mass redistribution that tore apart the agricultural sector. Experienced farmers fled or were forced out. Production collapsed. Exports vanished almost overnight. And when exports vanish, so does revenue. The government faced budget deficits that widened every month. Hospitals needed funding. Civil servants needed salaries. Infrastructure needed maintenance. And the treasury was empty. The setup was the same one that ruined Rome and Germany. Crisis, falling income, rising expenses, and leaders desperate for a temporary solution. So Zimbabwe's government did what countless governments had done before them. They printed money. At first it looked harmless. A few billion Zimbabwean dollars here, a few billion there. Just enough to bridge the gap. Just enough to avoid tough decisions. Just enough to pretend everything was still under control. But printing money to solve a deficit is like pouring gasoline on a campfire to keep it warm. You get heat, briefly, before everything around you erupts. As more currency flooded the economy, each existing dollar became worth less. Prices rose. The government printed more. Prices rose higher. The printers accelerated. By 2003, inflation had reached triple digits. By 2006, it passed 1,000%. By 2008, Zimbabwe had entered a realm of inflation so extreme that economists struggled to measure it. 89 sextillion%. That's a number with 21 zeros. A number beyond comprehension. Banknotes became absurd. 1 million, 10 million, 100 million, then billions, then trillions. Eventually, the government printed a $100 trillion note, the largest ever printed by any country. And it was barely enough to buy bread. People rushed to shops the moment they received paychecks because waiting even a few hours meant their money would lose half its value. Salaries were spent instantly. Savings evaporated. Businesses collapsed. Entire families starved. Children played with bundles of bills the way kids elsewhere play with Legos. It was cheaper to use money as confetti than to buy decorations with it. Hyperinflation didn't just kill wealth. It killed trust. It killed stability. It killed the belief that tomorrow would be better than today. And eventually Zimbabwe's currency died altogether. The government abandoned it and switched to foreign currencies, US dollars, South African rand. Imagine that. A sovereign nation forced to discard its own money because it had become worthless. But this is what happens when leaders believe they can violate the laws of economics. When they tell themselves that this time is different. When they insist that printing money creates prosperity. Rome tried it. Germany tried it. Zimbabwe tried it. And every time the cycle ended the same way. With a broken society, shattered savings, and a country brought to its knees. But here's the part we cannot ignore. Those disasters were isolated. Localized. Limited to one empire, one nation, one region at a time. Today, the next crisis won't be. Next, the conclusion, and the warning the modern world desperately needs to hear. Rome. Weimar Germany. Zimbabwe. Three civilizations separated by thousands of years, oceans, cultures, technologies, yet united by one fatal illusion. The belief that money can be created without consequence. That wealth can appear with the push of a button. That printing solves more problems than it creates. Every one of them learned the truth the same way. Through ruin. But here is the part that should make every person today stop and pay attention. We are repeating the same pattern. Not in one empire. Not in one nation. But everywhere. For decades, major economies around the world have treated money like an infinite resource. Central banks create trillions at the slightest sign of crisis. Governments run deficits larger than entire nations' GDPs. Debt piles higher with each passing year. Leaders tell us the same comforting lie that Rome's emperors told, that Weimar's politicians whispered, that Zimbabwe's officials insisted. Don't worry. We can control this. We know what we're doing. This time is different. But history doesn't care about confidence. It doesn't bend for political convenience. It doesn't rewrite the laws of economics. When you create more money than your economy can support, value evaporates. When value evaporates, trust collapses. And when trust collapses, civilizations fall. Every single time. Look around. Global debt has passed levels previous generations would have considered unthinkable. Currencies fluctuate wildly. Inflation, once asleep for decades, has awakened, and it is hungry. Governments scramble to fix crises by doing the one thing that always makes them worse. Printing more money. We are living inside the same cycle historians have documented for 2,000 years. And yet almost nobody sees it. Because people living through a collapse rarely realize it's happening. Until the day their savings vanish. Their currency cracks. Their future dissolves into uncertainty. Rome didn't believe it could fall. Weimar didn't believe it could fall. Zimbabwe didn't believe it could fall. And neither do we. But the lesson is right there, carved into history like a warning etched in stone. When nations ignore economic reality eventually destroys them. The next monetary crisis won't be local. It won't be regional. It won't be a footnote in some future history book. It will be global. Because today's currencies are connected. Today's banks are intertwined. Today's debts bind nations together like links in a chain. And chains don't break one link at a time. They snap all at once. The question isn't if another collapse is coming. The question is how prepared you'll be when it does. And that's why understanding these patterns matters. History doesn't repeat perfectly, but it rhymes with terrifying accuracy. And the more you recognize those echoes, the less likely you are to be blindsided by the next shockwave. If you've made it this far, you already understand something most people ignore. Our world is shaped by cycles most never see coming. Cycles that decide the rise and fall of nations, currencies, and entire eras. And if you want to keep uncovering these hidden patterns, if you want to understand the financial forces that guide our world, if you want to be ready for whatever comes next, then you're exactly where you need to be. This is Finance Archives, where history becomes a warning, where patterns become predictions, and where knowledge becomes your greatest financial defense. If you found value in this journey, make sure to subscribe, because the past still has many more secrets to reveal. And trust me, you'll want to be here when we uncover them.